About Last Night by Catherine Elliott. Read for you by Caroline Doughty. The immensely funny and heartwarming #1 bestseller. Molly gets a second chance at life, but will she have the courage to take it? Molly Faulkner has traded London for a dream home in the country. Except it was her husband's dream, not hers, and David is, well, rather dead now. So when a distant relative leaves her a London townhouse, Molly is ready to quit the good life and return to her good life. But there's a rather tall, handsome problem, a man who's already living in Molly's new house. And when a face from her past reappears, she's no longer quite sure where she belongs. Do any of the men in Molly's life have honourable intentions? Is she really ready to ditch muddy wellies for high heels? Or is she saying goodbye to the delights of country life too soon? Episode 1. I stood at the gate with my laden wheelbarrow and ran a practised eye over my acres, which stretched away in a plateau before me, rising gently to the hills beyond. I wished I felt more romantic and wistful about it, this sylvan scene and all that. I didn't, though. I felt tired, bleary-eyed, and frankly fed up. There was barely a paddock I could enter these days without fearing for my safety, and feeding my sheep had become a matter of high subterfuge and low cunning. If I fed the boys first, the ewes in the far field were instantly alerted and came rushing across for their breakfast. But if I fed the ewes, it involved going through Buddy's field, and Buddy wanted to have his way with me, the only one who did these days. And Buddy was a big ram. Sometimes I wished I'd started the day with a pot of tea delivered by a handsome man with a charming smile. Often, actually. A biddable sheepdog would be good, too. To be fair, the man I'd had, my husband David, would have been brilliant. He'd be absolutely in his element out here. It was everything he'd ever fondly imagined he'd be doing, in fact, before fate had so rudely intervened. He'd be up with the light, feeding and tending these characters before pottering off to Ludlow for a few hours' gentle conveyancing in his sleepy lawyer's office, the one he'd swapped for the city slicker's firm he'd come to hate. We'd snapped up this rural idyll with its pretty farmhouse and 90 acres, and then he'd found his easy-going job a short drive away. Everything had slotted ridiculously simply into place, no doubt because David was at the helm. We'd taken the children out of their pushy London schools, I'd given up my job, and we'd come down here, all ready for the good life. And it had been, fleetingly, until, disappointingly, one day, David had taken our car to the village to get some shopping, and never returned. I say disappointingly in that ironic, deliberately shocking way because if I delved any deeper into my grief, I'd be back to square one. Back with my sleepless nights, my inability to motivate myself, my weight loss, and my 3 distressed children. So, 5 years down the track, I've adopted this splendidly sort of upper-class, stiff upper lip approach to my husband's death, to stop myself from gagging when his name is mentioned. And actually, I can quite see how it got people through a war. It certainly works for me. I walked back to the house wondering if anyone was even up, had fed the dogs or emptied the dishwasher, the likelihood being little short of a miracle. I paused for a moment before I went into the house, gazed at the row of uninterrupted hills rolling away in the distance. How he would have loved this. And how mad he would have been to miss it on account of a stupid worn-out brake pad. That had been my overriding emotion for a long time. Anger. How hacked off he'd be to miss all of this, his dream, his reward for all those years in the city, his putative gold watch. We'd been here all of 6 weeks. It was the end of the summer holidays. When it happened, Minna and Nico had been on the grass tennis court at the bottom of the garden, now a sea of weeds. I remembered that long walk out there after I'd had the visit from the police. Remembered them lowering their rackets as I approached and as they saw my face. I knew they'd had a flash of recognition before I spoke, before I told them that their lives would never be the same again. I remember that like it was yesterday. Lucy's face I still can't even bring myself to remember. But as I say, that was 5 years ago, and however much you think life will never move on one jot, it jolly well does, at a rickety-rackety pace. And right now I had more pressing problems, like how were we going to stay here? My pledge all those years ago to David's ghost. And how all my various concerns, the horse stealing, the lavender soap, the sheep farming, and more recently the boxer shorts and scanty ladies' underwear business, were going to keep us afloat. I spotted Lucy in the kitchen. She was definitely not dressed for Hertfordshire today, in tailored black trousers and a nipped-in white jacket. "What are you doing up?" I shut the back door on a blast of air. "I'm going back to London. Can you drop me at the station?" "Please," I thought to myself. "I thought you said the shop was shut today and you were going to help Minna with her project." "It is shut, but there's loads to do to catch up on, and it's pointless helping Minna with her project. It doesn't exist. She only said that to get you off her back in the holidays." "Right," I said shortly. "The bailiff came again," Lucy told me. I swung around, appalled. "Did he? Oh no, which one?" "The nice one, Tia." "Oh, thank heavens. What did you say?" "I said you'd sort it out by the end of the week. Don't stress, Mum. She was very nice. But you haven't paid the council tax," Lucy said gently. My mouth was dry. I know, but I'm getting loads from that chap who's buying Nutty." "Yes, I told her that, although she did ask if Nutty was a relative or a horse." She grinned. "Maybe give her a ring?" Yes, I will." I flew to find my phone on the overflowing dresser. "Here." Lucy pulled it out from under a pile. "But my train is in 20 minutes, Mum, so maybe you'll call when you get back." Who else is up? Distinct signs of life were emanating from above. "Oh yeah, Minna is, awake, but she's deep in negotiation with Toxic Ted. I don't care how deep she—" I leapt to the foot of the stairs. "Minna! Minna!" I yelled. "Get down here and take your sister to the station. I've got better things to do." Silence, obviously. "Go and get her," I snapped furiously. Lucy had already slunk past me. "And please ask yourselves why your lives are so much more important than mine." When they came down, Minna looking thunderous with a coat over her pyjamas. "Why can't Nico?" she snarled. I imagine he's still asleep. "Golden boy." I ignored her, and they slunk slowly out to the car together, no doubt discussing how impossible I was. I glanced at the clock. Oh, they'd now be late. I ran outside as Minna executed a smart three-point turn in the yard. "And don't race! So what if you have to get the next train? Don't race like idiots to catch it." They roared out of the yard, scattering ducks and gravel in their wake, leaving me standing in a cloud of dust. As I went back inside, a curtain twitched and fell back again. Ah, so Nico was up. At length he came down and sat on the stairs behind me, hunched in his dressing gown. I made a pot of tea for us, my mind on what to sell next should Nutty, my gelding, fail the vet. Ah, yes, the transaction was subject to the vet's examination and report, which scuppered half my sales these days. A huge involuntary sigh unfolded from my wellies, which I had yet to remove. I handed a mug of tea wordlessly to my son. His pale, bony, nicotine-stained fingers reached through the spindles like a Hogwarts illustration. Why so gloomy, Ma? So theatrically careworn? Nicholas, or Nico, the last of my brood, my only boy, regarded me in amusement from under a shaggy, recently peroxided, blonde fringe. Well, we're going to have to move, Nico. It's final now. Lucy says the bailiffs have been back. Ah, he nodded unmoved. Very David Copperfield. I shrugged, matching his composure. She says these days they don't come in and nick your DVD player, just politely ask for a check. And you know they got to come through the door. I Googled it. That's the only entry route available to them now. Doesn't a whole screenplay of other historical routes play out in your head, accompanied by a 70s soundtrack from the Sweeney or something, kicked in windows, smashing glass? Thanks for that, darling. And you have to actually invite them in. Even when you've opened the door, they can't just step over the threshold. I'll bear that in mind. Feed the geese and the horses and the cats, would you? Well, I'll feed the cat, but I think you'll find she's very much singular these days. Cleo's left to live with the Nelsons. Permanently? I thought she just popped in and out. Oh, I'm sad about that. Cleo's not. She's living on salmon and cream. I sighed. Well, feed the rest for me, there's a love. And put some drugs in Nutty's... Certainly not. He hasn't been lame for months. I don't sell dodgy horses. Nico took his tea upstairs to get changed, go out and feed what remained of our stock. Also, I opened a lot of your brown envelopes, he said, pausing at the top of the stairs. The ones you hide down the sofa. They made interesting reading. But one was that tax rebate you've been waiting for. He delved in his dressing-gown pocket and frisbeed an envelope down to me. I ripped it open. A cheque fell out. You can at least get the council tax paid. I stared at it. Then I clutched it to my bosom and gazed up at him starry-eyed. Oh, Nico, why didn't you say? He shrugged. I just have. You have to open this stuff, Ma. Not all of it's bad. I instantly rang Tia and promised her that once it had cleared, the money would be hers, to pay whatever bills she thought best. All of them, she said happily. Get the lot off your back. Oh, I'm so pleased. But Molly, you're still going to have to think about selling. The rebates don't fall out of the sky every month. I know. Shall I get Peter to come round? Peter Cox was the local estate agent. Kind, avuncular, and tweedy. He was no shark and would, I knew, have my best interests at heart. Get me the very best deal. I hesitated. Why not? It's just the animals, Tia. I mean, what am I supposed to do with them all? In a cottage? In the village? Who says you can't find a cottage with a few stables and paddocks? But probably only a 2 up, 2 down, if it's got any land. And then what about the children? They're huge, Moll, and migrating to London. Couldn't Lucy and Minna share a room? They could, but then they might not come back, I thought. And if they did decide to stay, she went on, they could even pay some rent. Most kids do around here. Yes, but not for ages. Lucy's the only one who's got a job. And I can't ask her to send money back like some mother in the Philippines. I'd say Herefordshire is the British equivalent of the Philippines, she said darkly. And let's face it, your own mother would have no such scruples. I saw her in town just now, by the way. She said your uncle died. Sorry about that. I frowned. I don't have an uncle. Oh, how strange. Funny name. Custer or something. Oh, Cuthbert? David's uncle? Has he? I didn't know. Not sure if I even met him, actually. But how sad. I mean, he must have been ancient. I frowned. How on earth did Mum know that? No idea. That famous crystal ball? Perhaps for once it really did give off some information. She was on her way to see you anyway. Perhaps she's got a vibe. Perhaps. At that moment, a throaty exhaust pipe backfired in the yard, making me glance out of the window. An old black Volvo was pulling in. Ah, talk of the devil. The woman herself was getting out and going around to open the trunk and remove some shopping. She's already here, dear. The eagle has landed. No doubt come to press gang me into lending a hand at the Hereford show, where she's taken a tent, reading palms, no less. Okay, I'll let you go. Come and have lunch with me next week, though, Moll. My treat. You're on. I put the phone down as my mother came beetling across the yard, shopping bags in hand. Her hair was piled up in a sort of mad haystack bun, but then, as she said, it befitted her image as Cosmic Pam, which the children had originally called her as a joke, but which had stuck and become, heaven help us, her professional name. Oh yes, I was lucky enough to have a mother with psychic powers. I noticed her eyes were very bright this morning, her cheeks flushed. She turned, headed no doubt for the Romany-style caravan, sitting in my back garden, where she read tarot cards and now, it seemed, palms. I liked having her close by, and I'd hazard she liked it too. We had rules to prevent the situation becoming a time-waster. She'd breeze on by with a cheery wave first thing, and I'd wave back. We didn't chat and eat biscuits for ages, although the children had no such scruples. They were in there a lot, fascinated by their fates. This morning, however, I wanted a word, and so, apparently, did she. She came straight to the back door when I opened it, and before she'd even said hello, to the point. Uncle Cuthbert's died, she told me importantly as she swept past me and reached for the mug of tea I'd been about to drink myself. Thanks, love. She fixed me with beady dark eyes as she settled herself down on a chair at the kitchen table. I know, Tia told me. Apparently you've seen fit to spread word about town before you even told me. And he wasn't even my uncle, Mum. Let alone yours, he was David's. Exactly, your husband's uncle, and he was his only relative. Who was? David. She gave me those eyes again. I stared at her for a long time. I had a nasty feeling I knew where she was going with this. Mum, if you think for one moment... She raised her eyebrows disingenuously. What? I know the way your mind works. Well, it's a thought, isn't it? I gaped at her in disbelief. Oh, don't be silly, I snorted eventually. Cuthbert's an uncle-in-law. He's not going to remember a woman he barely met. I'm not even sure I did meet him. And anyway, how do you know he died? I read it. I make it my business to know these things. After all, you never know who might be trying to get in touch. How do you mean? From beyond. She jerked her head meaningfully. Particularly if they've only just popped off. Important to read the announcements. She peered down at the court and social page. Ah, here we are. Faulkner. Cuthbert James Christopher. Died peacefully at home on April the 6th. She looked up. I blinked. Well, that's it? That's it. But sort of short, isn't it? I mean, aren't they usually much longer? Funeral details, stuff about flowers and donations. Exactly. My mother pursed her lips. Interesting, Sort of solitary. No, not remotely. Just succinct. And anyway, even if he doesn't have family, he'll have left whatever he had to... I don't know, something close to his heart. He might, she agreed thoughtfully. But on the other hand, he might not. I regarded her, the wise woman of the West Country, no less, on her metaphorical throne, my old Windsor chair, I took a deep breath, let it out wearily. Honestly, I despair of you sometimes, Mother. I really do. Look, love, I'm just being realistic. In all probability, you're right. His estate will go to a charity or something. But it could go to his nearest blood relative, and judging by this announcement, she jabbed it with her finger, doesn't look like he's got anyone else, so that's you. Oh, hardly, I scoffed. A niece-in-law. Not much blood there. Mum, I'm ashamed of you. The poor man is barely cold, and you're rubbing your hands with glee. Wondering what's in his coffers. Talk about ambulance chasing. I don't think you'll find it's an ambulance I'm pursuing, she remarked, sotto voce. I swung about. What? Nothing, she said hastily. I'm not being gleeful, just practical. The man was 90-odd, for heaven's sake. Had a rich and fulfilled life. It's not like I bumped him off. How do you know anything about him? I narrowed my eyes suspiciously. You haven't been researching him, have you? You dreadful old druid? Don't be ridiculous. I certainly haven't stalked his deathbed. But there's a great deal to be learned through esoteric channels. She affected a vague, mystical expression. By Googling him, I can't think of anything more vulgar than profiting from a death, Mum. I've had one myself, and the mere fact that it could be spoken of in the same breath as money is hideous. And can you imagine if David's relatives had popped out of the woodwork and clustered around, wondering what was in the kitty? They did. At least one or two of the godchildren did, although you were too grief-stricken to notice. Soon backed off when they realized he hadn't even managed to provide for his own family. And I know, she said quickly, seeing my face, that he wasn't expecting to have to do that at his age. I'm just saying, you've been up the creek for 5 years, and now, getting all pious about a tiny bit of good fortune that might finally have come your way is a bit short-sighted. That's all. Good fortune? You don't know anything about him. Don't know what state his affairs were in. She raised her eyebrows. I assume you mean Cuthbert's affairs. You're talking about Cuthbert's estate. No, absolutely not. Not in that way. I'm just saying... Obviously, I've no idea, she interrupted crisply. But when I met him, he struck me as a very grand and very civilized old gentleman. You've met him? Of course I have, at the funeral. Oh. I sat down, gripped the tea towel I was holding. Was he there? Of course he was there. I'd barely been there myself, had been in such a fog, such a mist of tears and shock and disbelief. I hadn't rallied at all. I had since. Long term, I've been pretty good and have kept the children on track. Just. And kept the farm and my small business going, and actually had felt better as the months and years had gone by, as the self-help books said I would. But no, in the short term, I'd been a mess. Which was the right way round, everyone said. None of that stoic fortitude for the first few months, and then collapsing in a heap later. I collapsed first, to the extent that I barely remembered the funeral. Here in the village, in the little church in the valley, barely remembered who came, except that it was full. How far did he come? Well, he was living in London at the time. What was he like? Delightful, as I've told you, and very sweet and sad about David, but quite ancient even then. I thought back. On 2 sticks, sitting with a rug on his knees in the corner. Possibly. She looked shifty. Although that might have been Albert. White hair? Yes, swept back. Oh, okay, vaguely. I summoned up a hazy mental vision of Cuthbert. David's own parents had died in the Boxing Day tsunami 10 years ago, after a much-longed-for holiday, so they hadn't even been there. Oh yes, we'd had our share of tragedy in this family. And I, for one, would not be profiting from it in any way. I roused myself and regarded her sternly. Get thee to thy crystal ball, you old witch. I want none of your dark side. How is that going, by the way? Mum had recently been recruited by Just 15 website to write the horoscope page, something the children and I found hilarious. Oh, frightfully well, she beamed, although I'm a bit stuck on Taurus, but I thought I could couch it in terms of challenging times ahead, but great opportunities to assert independence. The boyfriend's dumping them? Precisely. She'd got this slightly bizarre, ethereal world the way most people do, apparently. By going to see a medium herself and being told she was extraordinarily spiritual. She'd rushed home thinking she was the second coming. The woman literally flinched when she touched my hand, she gasped. So much electricity, she said. The children and I had clustered around excitedly to witness her powers and discovered the extent of them was to peer into a cupful of tea leaves that Minna had made, frown and say, "You're in a crowd." Ignoring our hilarity, she persevered. Never one to start small, she'd gone the whole shebang instead, buying herself a caravan on eBay and setting herself up as Cosmic Pam. So that practically overnight, there she was, ta-da, a bona fide mystic. And in rural Herefordshire, what with the recession and unemployment and long winter afternoons, people had many gloomy moments. They needed a bit of hope. Plus, Mum didn't charge much and provided tea and biscuits, so they came in their droves, mostly because her news was always cheerful. An unexpected pleasure is coming your way. Vague, too, note. Could be a new lover, could be a cream cake. They all left beaming, though, vowing to return again next week and cross her palm with yet more silver. I sighed. You're a charlatan, Mum, but never let anyone suggest you don't do it with charm. I like to bring a little joy into people's lives, she agreed. I smiled, but my mind was back on more important matters. I've got a lot to do today, so if you wouldn't mind sugaring off to your own lair, that idiot Paddy Campbell's coming over to vet Nutty at 12. Oh, they've chosen Paddy, have they? Well, you won't get a dodgy fetlock past him. Give him a bit of anti-inflammatory, I would. Mum, I'm not drugging my horse to get it through the veterinary examination. I don't know what sort of person you and Nico think I am. She shrugged. The sort to sell a 3-legged gelding to an unsuspecting buyer, but not to take advantage of a real stroke of luck when it comes your way, in the shape of a straight-up, no-wool-pulling inheritance, which, if you're not sharpish, someone will snaffle. Well, if it's that straight up, it'll come to me in the form of an official lawyer's letter, won't it? I countered sweetly. Coming back from the village some time later, I got out of the car and encountered Nico in the yard, leading Nutty from his stable. Paddy Campbell's red pickup was over by the barn, and it confirmed my fears. He was early as usual. I glanced at my watch. Or, okay, on time. And I'd hoped to get Nutty out for 5 minutes before he came, to loosen him up a bit. Not that he needed loosening up, but no gentleman of a certain age wants to trot smartly from a standing start when they've just opened their eyes in the morning, do they? I hastened across. "Morning, Paddy," I cried jovially. "What do you think of my lovely boy, then?" "Well, he's an old boy, isn't he? We all know that, don't we, Molly?" He glanced around as I approached. Tall, broad-shouldered, and with tousled auburn hair and a narrow, intelligent face. He'd be attractive if he wasn't always so cross and busy. Oh, he's got a bit of maturity for sure, but that's what purchasers want these days, isn't it? A reliable sort who's been there, done everything. is always in the rosettes and not going to spook the first stitch he sees. No one wants to buy anything under 10 these days. He's well over 15, he said as Nico brought him trotting back, jogging beside him. Thanks, darling, I said gratefully, seeing my son looking mutinous. No problem, he replied, dropping the head collar rope. Just the first 2 hours of my revision down the drain with all this bloody animal maintenance. Your loss, mother. He slouched off into the house. My loss? Anyway, he's a fine-looking horse, don't you think? I said, keeping a bright smile going. Ah, Nutty. Galway Nuthatch is his registered name. But he's more like 13 or maybe 14, I agree. He ignored me, bending down to feel his legs. Nothing wrong with those, I chortled, wishing the Hiltons had asked for old Charlie Parker instead. He was much more of a pushover, most biddable with tea and biscuits. Cup of tea, Paddy? No, thanks. Trot him up again for me, would you, Molly? Nico barely got him out of a walk. I gave Nutty a smart tap on the bottom with the end of the rope, and we set off briskly up the track, turning the corner. I smiled delightedly as we came back in an effort to distract Paddy, but his eyes were firmly on the horse's legs, not mine. If he smiled occasionally, it would help, I thought irritably. He's so flipping serious all the time. When I'd come to a grinning halt, Paddy pursed his lips as he wrote something down on his pad. Then, with a stethoscope to his ear, he went to listen to Nutty's heart. I expect that's pounding a bit. Mine certainly is, I told him, wishing I'd thought to brush my hair and put some lipstick on before this wretched man came round, criticising my livestock. Did you ride as a child, Paddy? Of course. Ever had a horse vetted? I very much doubt it. We just rode whatever was in the field. I grew up in rural Ireland, don't forget. If anyone bought a horse, it was bound to be their uncles or their cousins. No one looked too closely. Exactly, I exclaimed, seizing on this scrap of humanity. But Molly, times have changed. He took his stethoscope from his ears and looked at me squarely. Nice, steady brown eyes and a tanned face. The Hiltons are paying me a sizable fee to examine this horse, and I'm not going to lie to them, am I? Good heavens, no. No, I'm not suggesting there's anything to lie about. I'm just saying in this bureaucratic, litigious world, it's all got a bit ridiculous. He gave me a level look. You mean I'm more nervous about being sued by the Hiltons because I pass him and then he goes lame in a fortnight? Well, it was exactly what I meant. Molly, trust me, I'd love to pass your horse and for everyone to be happy. Yes, I breathed. But if he's in any way wide of the mark they've asked me to judge him by, you know I can't do that. But he's not, necessarily. He made for his car. Charlie would, I muttered as I tailed him. I'll pretend I didn't hear that. Okay, and I totally take it back. I mean, Charlie would be as professional as you are. Quite. So you'll pass him, will you, Paddy? I asked anxiously as he got into his red pickup and slammed the door. Paddy broke into the first proper grin of the day. Now, Molly, you know the rules. That's for me to tell my client, Mark Hilton, and for you to find out. Ah, yes, of course. I feigned mock surprise, slapping the palms of my hand on my forehead. I clean forgot. But I was encouraged by the joke and the smile. Nice to see you anyway, Paddy, I called through the window, striking what I hoped was an attractive pose in the yard, hands in pockets of my faded skinny jeans, the wind in my hair. You too, Moll. He paused and his expression changed. Oh. And, by the way, I was sorry to hear about your uncle. Without waiting for my reply, he took off, disappearing in a cloud of dust. I turned on my heel and headed straight to the wooden gypsy caravan, painted in green and yellow swirls, perched on the terraced lawn. Whatever I'd be disturbing could easily be resumed. As it happened, when I burst into the predominantly pink, soft-lit interior, throws on the walls, fringes everywhere, candles burning, Cosmic Pam was at her table dispensing words of wisdom to a couple of very familiar customers. I stared, put my hands on my hips. I thought you were doing crucial politics revision. Oh, yeah. Nick withdrew his palm and flashed me a grin before slinking past, off down the steps. And I thought you were going to help Lucy source some flowers for her shop, I demanded of Minna, who was curled up on the sofa in the corner. I am. Chill, Mum. Granny and I were just going to have a chat. Yes, well, Minna, maybe I'll do your cards later, said Mum, catching a dangerous look in my eye. Minna sighed heavily. I rounded on my mother. Mum, did you tell Paddy Campbell my beloved uncle is dead? I might have mentioned it, yes. Why? Because I know exactly what you're doing. You're building up a head of momentum, building up a head of steam, so that by the end of the week everyone in the village will be consoling me about my uncle, who I was apparently so close to, and then the following week they'll be asking me if I was the nearest relative, and then the one after that, if I'm the only remaining relative, and after that, whether he'd euphemistically remembered me. What nonsense, she countered smoothly. Stop being such an interfering old bag, I told her sternly before turning and exiting. Granny's got a point, Minna told me, tailing me at a shuffling trot. Mum. What? Hasn't she got a point? About what? I countered, playing for time. About Dad's uncle. I mean, if we are, or you are, the beneficiary, surely it's only right. I didn't know him, Minna. How can that be right? So what? So everything, as I told Granny, if anything's legally due, it will appear, won't it? No, because you have to make a claim. He died intestate. There's no will. Granny checked. So what you have to do is to get in touch with his lawyer, say you're the nearest relative and claim the inheritance. You'd be mad not to at least try, Mum. And who, pray, is his lawyer? Hamilton and Simpson, 64 Onslow Terrace, London SW3. Came floating down from upstairs. Nico, his Apple Mac open on his lap, was sitting in his position on the top step. His telephone number's here too, Mum. I'll print it out and leave it on the kitchen table. Just give him a ring. It's an understandable inquiry. Under the circumstances, where's the harm? He smiled his most engaging smiles through the bars, looking so much like his father it made my heart hurt. Later that day, as I pulled into the yard back from yet another trip to the village, my mobile phone rang, and recognizing the number, my heart lurched. I took the call, sounding really rather upset because Samantha had so set her heart on him. Beatrice Hilton was ringing to tell me that sadly Nutty had failed the vet's examination, and since they really wanted an entirely sound horse, they wouldn't be buying him. Offering him at half price, which, frankly, was a complete bargain, couldn't tempt this woman who lived, I knew, like most people did, and like I used to live when I was a normal person, via sensible rules, not by the seat of her pants and on the smell of an oily rag. I accepted her commiserations, apologized for wasting her time, and when we'd said goodbye, I moaned low and banged my head on the steering wheel 3 times, like Basil Fawlty. When I raised it, eyes full, I'll admit, it was to see Paddy Campbell getting into his van around the far side of my hay barn. I stared, horrified, then I got out and dashed across, furious. "What in the world are you doing here?" I barked, thinking I might actually bite him. take a chunk out of his arm. You are absolutely the last person I want to see. He shrugged. Minna called me, and quite right too. You've got a ewe with mastitis, Molly. I know, I snarled. And I've been expressing her twice a day myself. I don't need some expensive veterinarian surgeon who not only ruins my horse-dealing livelihood, but charges like a wounded rhino, coming round here and... She needs antibiotics, he interrupted, and she'll need some more tomorrow. He tossed me a plastic bag with a syringe and a bottle inside. And no, they're not on the house. I don't like treating distressed animals any more than you like paying for them, Molly. But needs must. Angrily, he sped off. When I got to the kitchen, Nico was at the computer at my desk pressing send on an official-looking document, his phone to his ear. It's on its way, Luce, he said, clearly talking to his sister. What are you doing looking at my emails? I snarled. It's the email the court lawyer sent you last week, which you hadn't bothered to open, presumably because you thought it was yet another summons, and which they sent in desperation because you didn't respond to their letter. I imagine that's under the sofa rather than down the side of it. Didn't think to look there. What do you mean? I whispered, peering over his shoulder. Sit, he ordered, getting up, and read. I did. Dear Mrs. Faulkner, we act on behalf of the Treasury lawyer and also on behalf of the late Mr. Cuthbert Faulkner, whose estate we are instructed to oversee as trustees. Mr. Faulkner died intestate, and our preliminary research indicates that your late husband, the son of Mr. Faulkner's late brother, was his only blood relative. Consequently, subject to how your late husband left his own estate, you could conceivably be a legitimate beneficiary. We therefore invite you to make an appointment with us at the above address to proceed with inquiries into this matter and discuss it further. We look forward to hearing from you. Yours sincerely, P.D. Hamilton, Esquire, Hamilton and Simpson, LLP. Oh! 3 pairs of eyes met mine, Nico's, Minna's, and my mother's beady brown ones, peering around the corner from the hall. Now will you do something about it? She demanded softly.